Welcome to Affair Crimes Uncovered. Enjoy this true crime story.
James Hartley was the golden boy of American politics. At just 42 years old, he had already served 2 terms as a U.S. Senator from the great state of Ohio. With his chiseled jawline, piercing blue eyes, and a full head of salt and pepper hair, he was as photogenic as they come. But it wasn't just his looks that made him popular. Hartley had a way with words that could charm even his fiercest opponents. Born and raised in a small town outside of Columbus, Hartley came from humble beginnings. His father was a factory worker, and his mother was a schoolteacher. From an early age, James showed a keen interest in politics and public service. He was class president all 4 years of high school and went on to study political science at Ohio State University. After college, Hartley worked as a staffer for the state legislature before running for office himself. He quickly climbed the political ladder, serving first as a state representative, then as lieutenant governor, before making the leap to the U.S. Senate at the age of 36. In Washington, Hartley was known as a moderate who could work across the aisle. He championed causes like education reform and infrastructure investment, earning respect from both Democrats and Republicans. Many political pundits saw him as a future presidential contender. James Hartley is the real deal, one CNN analyst had said. He's got the looks, the brains, and the bipartisan appeal. Mark my words, we'll see him in the White House one day. But behind the scenes, all was not well in Senator Hartley's world. His marriage to his college sweetheart Sarah had grown cold over the years. The long hours and constant travel had taken their toll. While they put on a united front for the cameras, those close to the couple knew they were drifting apart. Enter Michael Reeves, the head of Hartley's security detail. A former Navy SEAL with 15 years of experience in personal protection, Reeves was handpicked to guard the rising political star. He was everything Hartley wasn't: rugged, stoic, and built like a brick wall. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of solid muscle, Reeves cut an imposing figure. What few people knew was that Michael Reeves had a wife named Jessica. 10 years his junior, Jessica was a stunning brunette with a quick wit and an infectious laugh. She worked as a nurse at a local hospital and often complained about the long hours her husband spent away from home guarding the senator. Little did anyone know that these 4 lives, James, Sarah, Michael, and Jessica, were about to become entangled in a web of passion, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. It was a crisp autumn evening in Washington, D.C., when Senator Hartley first met Jessica Reeves. The occasion was a charity gala at the Kennedy Center, and Hartley was in attendance with his wife Sarah. As usual, Michael Reeves was close by, scanning the crowd for any potential threats. "I'm going to powder my nose," Sarah whispered to her husband, leaving him alone at their table. Moments later, a waiter accidentally bumped into Jessica, who was carrying a glass of red wine. The drink spilled all over her elegant black dress, causing a commotion. "Oh no!" Jessica exclaimed, looking down at the growing stain. Without hesitation, Senator Hartley grabbed a napkin and rushed to her aid. "Here, let me help you with that," he said, dabbing at the stain. Jessica looked up, her brown eyes meeting the senator's blue ones. "Thank you, Senator Hartley. I'm so embarrassed." "Please, call me James," he replied with a warm smile, "and don't be embarrassed. These things happen." As they chatted, Hartley couldn't help but notice how beautiful Jessica was. Her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her laugh was melodious. He found himself captivated by her presence. From across the room, Michael Reeves watched the interaction with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He had never seen the senator so animated in conversation before, especially not with a woman other than his wife. When Sarah returned from the restroom, she found her husband deep in conversation with Jessica. "James, darling, who's your new friend?" she asked, a hint of tension in her voice. "Oh, Sarah, this is Jessica. She had a little accident with some wine, and I was just helping her out," Hartley explained, suddenly aware of how long he had been talking to Jessica. "It's nice to meet you, Jessica," Sarah said coolly. "I hope the stain comes out of your lovely dress." As the evening wore on, Hartley found his eyes continually drawn to Jessica. He watched as she laughed and danced with other guests, feeling a pang of jealousy he knew he had no right to feel. Later that night, as the Hartleys were leaving the gala, the senator spotted Jessica again. She was standing alone, waiting for her ride. "Michael," Hartley called to his security chief. "Could you please make sure Mrs. Reeves gets home safely? It's late, and I'd feel better knowing she had an escort." Reeves nodded, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Of course, Senator. I'll take care of it." As they drove home in silence, Sarah turned to her husband. "You seemed quite taken with that woman tonight. Jessica, was it?" Hartley felt a flush of guilt. "She's just someone I met at the party, Sarah. Nothing more." But even as he said the words, James Hartley knew they weren't entirely true. Something had sparked between him and Jessica Reeves that night. Something that would soon grow into a raging inferno. In the weeks following the gala, Senator Hartley found himself thinking about Jessica Reeves more and more. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on his work and his family, but her face kept appearing in his mind. One afternoon, as Hartley was leaving his office on Capitol Hill, he quite literally bumped into Jessica in the hallway. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Senator," Jessica said, steadying herself. "Jessica, what a pleasant surprise. What brings you to the Hill?" Hartley asked, his heart racing. "I was just dropping off some paperwork for Michael," she explained. "He forgot it this morning." Hartley nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Listen, I was just about to grab a coffee. Would you like to join me?" Jessica hesitated for a moment before smiling. "I'd love to." They found a quiet cafe a few blocks from the Capitol building. As they sipped their lattes, the conversation flowed easily between them. Hartley was captivated by Jessica's intelligence and humor. She, in turn, was drawn to his charisma and the way he listened intently to everything she said. "You know, I never properly thanked you for helping me with that wine stain at the gala," Jessica said, her eyes twinkling. Hartley laughed. "Well, consider this coffee my reward." As they parted ways that afternoon, both felt a sense of excitement and guilt. They knew they were treading on dangerous ground, but neither could deny the attraction they felt. Over the next few months, Hartley and Jessica found more and more reasons to accidentally run into each other. A chance meeting at a local bookstore, another coffee date disguised as a discussion about healthcare policy. Jessica's expertise as a nurse came in handy for this excuse. Each time they met, the sexual tension between them grew stronger. They both knew it was wrong. Hartley was married, and Jessica was married to his chief of security, for heaven's sake. But the heart wants what it wants, and their hearts were crying out for each other. It was a rainy Tuesday in March when things finally came to a head. Hartley had been in a particularly heated debate on the Senate floor, arguing passionately for a bill he had sponsored. As he left the Capitol building, drained and emotionally raw, he saw Jessica waiting by his car. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised but pleased. "I saw your speech on C-SPAN," she said softly. "You were amazing. I had to see you." Without another word, Hartley pulled her close and kissed her deeply. The rain poured down around them, but neither noticed. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the feel of their lips pressed together. "We can't do this here," Hartley whispered, when they finally broke apart. Jessica nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of desire and fear. "I know a place." They drove to a discreet hotel on the outskirts of the city. As soon as the door to their room closed behind them, they fell into each other's arms, months of pent-up passion finally finding release. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, reality began to set in. "What have we done?" Jessica murmured, tears forming in her eyes. Hartley pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that I can't stay away from you anymore." And so began the affair that would ultimately lead to tragedy. Senator James Hartley and Jessica Reeves, wife of his chief of security, embarked on a dangerous liaison, stealing moments together whenever they could. They told themselves it was just physical at first, a way to satisfy needs that weren't being met in their marriages. But as the weeks turned into months, they found themselves falling deeply in love. Little did they know that their secret wouldn't stay hidden forever, and when it came to light, the consequences would be devastating for everyone involved. As spring turned to summer, Senator Hartley and Jessica Reeves continued their clandestine affair. They became experts at sneaking around, using every trick in the book to keep their relationship hidden. Hartley would schedule late-night strategy sessions that were really rendezvous with Jessica. She would volunteer for extra shifts at the hospital that coincided with times her husband Michael was on duty with the senator. But no matter how careful they were, small changes in their behavior began to raise suspicions among those closest to them. Sarah Hartley noticed that her husband seemed distracted and distant. He was spending more time at the office than ever before, and when he was home, he was constantly checking his phone. At first, she chalked it up to the pressures of his job, but as time went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Sarah decided to confront him. "James, is everything okay? You've been so absent lately." Hartley felt a pang of guilt. "Of course, honey. I'm just stressed about this new bill we're trying to push through. You know how it is." Sarah nodded, not entirely convinced. "I do know, but I also know you, James, and something feels different." Meanwhile, Michael Reeves was having similar doubts about his wife. Jessica, once bubbly and affectionate, had grown quiet and withdrawn. She was working more hours at the hospital and seemed to always have an excuse for why she couldn't spend time with him. One night, as Jessica was getting ready to leave for what she claimed was a girls' night out, Michael decided to dig a little deeper. "Who are you going out with tonight?" he asked casually. Jessica hesitated for a split second before answering. "Oh, just some of the nurses from work. We're trying that new wine bar downtown." Michael nodded, his instincts on high alert. In his years as a security professional, he had learned to spot when someone was lying. And right now, all of his training was telling him that his wife wasn't being truthful. After Jessica left, Michael sat in their living room, turning things over in his mind. He thought back to the charity gala where he had first seen Jessica talking to Senator Hartley. He remembered the way the senator had looked at her, and how animated Jessica had been in conversation. At the time, he had brushed it off as nothing. But now, with all these other little changes, could it be possible? The thought made Michael's blood run cold. He didn't want to believe it, but he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Something was going on between his wife and the man he was sworn to protect. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Michael decided to do some investigating of his own. He might be Senator Hartley's chief of security, but he was also a husband who feared he was being betrayed. Little did Michael know that his suspicions were about to lead him down a dark and dangerous path, one that would end in tragedy for all involved. As summer faded into fall, the affair between Senator James Hartley and Jessica Reeves continued to burn hot. But the flames of passion were about to be doused by the cold water of reality. Michael Reeves, driven by his growing suspicions, had begun to keep a closer eye on both his wife and the senator. He started logging Jessica's comings and goings, noting discrepancies in her stories about where she had been. He also paid more attention to Senator Hartley's schedule, looking for patterns or unusual behavior. One crisp October evening, Michael's vigilance paid off. Senator Hartley had claimed to be working late at his office, but when Michael drove by, the lights were off. On a hunch, he decided to swing by the hotel where he and Jessica had stayed during their early days of marriage. As he pulled into the parking lot, his heart sank. There, in a far corner, was the senator's car, and parked right next to it was Jessica's SUV. Michael sat in his car for what felt like hours, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to storm into the hotel and confront them. Another part wanted to drive away and pretend he had never seen anything. In the end, he did neither. Instead, he took out his phone and snapped a few pictures of the cars, then drove home to wait. When Jessica returned home later that night, Michael was sitting in the dark living room. "How was girls' night?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Jessica jumped, startled by his presence. "Michael, you scared me. It was fine." "Really? Because I could have sworn I saw your car at the Oakwood Hotel earlier, right next to Senator Hartley's." The color drained from Jessica's face. I can explain," she stammered, but Michael didn't want to hear it. He stood up, his imposing frame looming over her. "How long?" he demanded. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" Jessica broke down, tears streaming down her face as she confessed to the affair. Michael listened in stony silence, his world crumbling around him. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Hartley was having a revelation of her own. While looking for a misplaced earring in James's desk drawer, she stumbled upon a burner phone. Curiosity got the better of her, and she turned it on. What she found made her heart stop. Dozens of text messages and photos, all exchanged between her husband and Jessica Reeves. The loving words, the intimate pictures, it was all there in black and white. Sarah felt as if she might be sick. She had suspected something was wrong, but this was beyond her worst nightmares. When James returned home that night, he found Sarah waiting for him, the burner phone on the coffee table between them. "Care to explain this?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. James felt the blood drain from his face. "Sarah, Don't," she cut him off. "Don't you dare try to lie your way out of this, James. I want the truth, all of it." And so, on that fateful night, both couples faced the ugly truth of the affair that had torn their lives apart. Tears were shed, voices were raised, and hearts were broken beyond repair. But this was just the beginning. The real tragedy was yet to come, as the exposure of the affair set in motion a chain of events that would lead to death and disgrace for all involved. The days following the revelation of the affair were a whirlwind of emotions and consequences. Both marriages were in tatters, and the once rising star of Senator James Hartley was quickly falling from grace. Sarah Hartley, devastated by her husband's betrayal, wasted no time in contacting a high-powered divorce attorney. She was determined to take James for everything he was worth, both financially and in the court of public opinion. "I gave you everything, James," she spat during one particularly heated argument. "My youth, my support, my love, and this is how you repay me? By sleeping with your bodyguard's wife?" James, for his part, was a shell of his former self. The confident, charismatic senator was gone, replaced by a man consumed by guilt and fear. He knew his political career was likely over, but even worse was the knowledge that he had destroyed not one but two families with his selfish actions. Michael Reeves, meanwhile, was struggling to contain his rage. Years of military training had taught him discipline, but this betrayal pushed him to the brink. He had trusted Hartley, had put his life on the line to protect him. And this was how he was repaid? One evening, about a week after the affair came to light, Michael showed up at the Hartley residence, his eyes wild with anger and alcohol. "You ruined everything," he shouted as James opened the door. "My marriage, my career, everything." Before James could react, Michael's fist connected with his jaw, sending the senator sprawling to the ground. Sarah, who had been packing her things upstairs, came running at the sound of the commotion. "Michael, stop!" she cried, but it was too late. The two men were locked in a brutal fight, years of pent-up emotions exploding in a flurry of fists and fury. By the time the police arrived, both men were bloodied and bruised, and Michael was being led away in handcuffs. The incident made headlines across the nation. "Senator's affair leads to violent confrontation," screamed on the front page of the Washington Post. Cable news networks ran the story 24/7, dissecting every sordid detail of the scandal. Jessica Reeves, caught in the middle of the storm, retreated to her parents' home in Ohio. She couldn't bear to face the media frenzy or the judgmental stares of her colleagues at the hospital. Her once promising career as a nurse was in shambles, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. As the days turned into weeks, the scandal showed no signs of dying down. More details emerged, including text messages and emails between Hartley and Jessica that were leaked to the press. The public was captivated by the tale of lust, betrayal, and violence that had unfolded in the nation's capital. Senator Hartley's political allies quickly distanced themselves from him. His own party leadership called for his resignation, unwilling to let the scandal taint their image any further. Hartley, once seen as a future presidential contender, was now a pariah in the very halls of power he had once dominated. But the worst was yet to come. As the pressure mounted and the walls closed in, one of the key players in this tragic tale would make a decision that would turn this scandal into something far more sinister. A decision that would end in death and cement the disgrace of all involved. The weeks following the public exposure of the affair were a blur of media scrutiny, legal battles, and personal turmoil for all involved. Senator James Hartley, once the golden boy of American politics, watched helplessly as his career and personal life crumbled around him. His wife, Sarah, had filed for divorce and was pursuing a scorched earth policy in the proceedings. She gave scathing interviews to the press, painting James as a serial philanderer who had betrayed not just her, but the trust of the American people. "He's not fit to serve in the Senate," she told a CNN reporter. If he could lie so easily to his wife of 20 years, how can the people of Ohio trust anything he says? The Senate Ethics Committee had launched an investigation into Hartley's conduct, focusing not just on the moral implications of the affair, but on whether he had misused public resources to facilitate his meetings with Jessica Reeves. Hartley's political allies, once so numerous and vocal in their support, had abandoned him en masse. He was a toxic asset, and no one wanted to be associated with him. The party leadership had made it clear that if he didn't resign, they would move to expel him from the Senate, a rare and devastating move. Michael Reeves, meanwhile, was facing his own legal troubles. The assault on Senator Hartley had led to charges of battery, and his security clearance had been revoked pending investigation. His career in personal protection was effectively over. The stress of the situation was taking its toll on Michael. He had started drinking heavily, his once imposing physique beginning to soften as he spent his days in a haze of alcohol and self-pity. His friends and former colleagues watched with growing concern as he spiraled downward. Jessica Reeves, hiding out at her parents' home in Ohio, was battling severe depression. She had lost her job at the hospital, her marriage was over, and she was being vilified in the press as a homewrecker. The guilt of what she had done, combined with the public shame, was almost too much to bear. It was in this pressure cooker of emotions and consequences that tragedy struck. On a rainy night in November, about 2 months after the scandal broke, Michael Reeves made a fateful decision. Drunk and despondent, he grabbed his service pistol, the one thing he had managed to hold on to from his former life, and drove to Senator Hartley's Washington, D.C. townhouse. Security footage would later show Michael pounding on the front door, swaying unsteadily on his feet. When Hartley opened the door, Michael pushed his way inside. The two men could be seen arguing through the front window. Neighbors reported hearing shouting, followed by 2 loud bangs. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. They found Senator James Hartley dead on the floor of his study, 2 bullet wounds in his chest. Michael Reeves was slumped in a chair across from him, the gun still in his hand. He had turned the weapon on himself after shooting Hartley. The news of the murder-suicide sent shockwaves through the nation. What had begun as a tawdry political sex scandal had ended in bloodshed and tragedy. In the days that followed, the media frenzy reached new heights. Every aspect of the story was dissected and analyzed. Pundits debated whether stricter gun control laws could have prevented the tragedy. Mental health experts weighed in on the psychological toll of public shaming in the age of social media. Sarah Hartley, now a widow, retreated from public view, overwhelmed by the twin burdens of grief and relief. In her one public statement, she said simply, "There are no winners here, only victims. I ask for privacy as I mourn not just my husband, but the life we once had." Jessica Reeves, upon hearing the news, suffered a complete breakdown. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility, unable to cope with the knowledge that her actions had led to 2 deaths. The scandal and its tragic conclusion would be remembered as one of the darkest chapters in recent American political history. It served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition, the destructive power of infidelity, and the potentially fatal consequences of personal and political betrayal. In the end, the story of Senator James Hartley's affair was more than just a tale of lust and betrayal. It was a stark reminder of the human cost of scandal, the fragility of reputation, and the devastating ripple effects that one's actions can have on countless lives. In the wake of the murder-suicide, the nation was left reeling. The shocking end to the scandal dominated news cycles for weeks, with every detail of the tragedy scrutinized and debated. The political establishment in Washington was quick to distance itself from the whole sordid affair. Hartley's former colleagues in the Senate made perfunctory statements of condolence, but there was an undercurrent of relief that the scandal had reached its conclusion, however tragic that conclusion might be. President Donald Trump addressed the nation from the Oval Office, her face grave as she spoke about the need for unity and healing. "This terrible event reminds us of the human cost of our political divisions," she said. "We must strive to be better, to do better for the sake of our nation and for each other." But even as the president called for calm and reflection, the tragedy became a political football. Gun control advocates pointed to Michael Reeves' ability to retain his weapon despite his obvious mental distress as evidence of the need for stricter laws. Mental health advocates used the story to push for better support systems for those struggling with depression and addiction. The families of both James Hartley and Michael Reeves were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Sarah Hartley, now a widow, found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to defend her late husband's legacy while also acknowledging his betrayal. In a poignant interview with Barbara Walters, she spoke about the complexity of her emotions. "I was angry with James, so angry," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But I never wanted this. Despite everything, he was the father of my children, my partner for 2 decades. His death has left a void that I don't know how to fill." Michael Reeves's family, meanwhile, struggled with their own grief and shame. His elderly parents, who had been so proud of their son's service to his country, now found themselves pariahs in their small Midwestern town. They eventually sold their home and moved to Florida, seeking anonymity in a state of retirees. Perhaps the most tragic figure in the aftermath was Jessica Reeves. After weeks in a psychiatric facility, she emerged a shell of her former self. The vibrant, ambitious nurse who had caught a senator's eye was gone, replaced by a woman haunted by guilt and regret. In her only public statement, given to a local Ohio newspaper, Jessica expressed her deep remorse. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said. "If I could go back and undo it all, I would in a heartbeat. Not a day goes by that I don't think about the pain I've caused and the lives that have been lost." Jessica eventually left the country, moving to a small town in Costa Rica where she could escape the notoriety that followed her in the States. Reports surfaced occasionally of a quiet American woman working at a local clinic, but for the most part, Jessica Reeves disappeared from public view. As months turned into years, the scandal began to fade from the national consciousness. Other political dramas took center stage. Other scandals captured the public's imagination. But for those directly involved and for the close observers of Washington politics, the Hartley affair, as it came to be known, left an indelible mark. Books were written about the scandal, dissecting every aspect of the story. A few years after the events, a Hollywood movie starring A-list actors dramatized the affair and its tragic conclusion, bringing the story to a new generation. In political circles, pulling a Hartley became shorthand for any career-ending scandal. Young staffers were warned about the dangers of infidelity and the importance of maintaining ethical standards both in their professional and personal lives. The Hartley affair also led to some concrete changes in Washington. The Senate implemented stricter ethics training for all members and staff. Security protocols for high-ranking officials were reviewed and tightened. There was a renewed focus on mental health support for those in high-stress political positions. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the way the public viewed their political leaders. The Hartley scandal had pulled back the curtain on the private lives of public figures, revealing the all-too-human flaws and weaknesses that existed behind the polished facades. For some, this led to a greater cynicism about politics and politicians. If someone like James Hartley, young, charismatic, seemingly principled, could fall so far, could any politician be trusted? Others, however, saw in the tragedy a call for greater empathy and understanding. The human frailties exposed by the scandal reminded people that their leaders were not infallible demigods, but flawed individuals capable of both great achievements and terrible mistakes. As the years passed, the Hartley affair became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how quickly a promising career and a seemingly perfect life could unravel. It stood as a testament to the destructive power of secrets and lies, and the far-reaching consequences of personal indiscretions in the public sphere. In the end, the story of Senator James Hartley was more than just a salacious scandal or a tragic crime. It was a deeply human story of ambition, desire, betrayal, and regret. A story that revealed the complex and often contradictory nature of the human heart. And in its aftermath, as the dust settled and the headlines faded, it left behind a changed political landscape and a nation forced to grapple with difficult questions about power, morality, and the price of public service. As the years passed and the raw emotions surrounding the Hartley affair began to subside, a period of reflection and analysis began. Political scientists, ethicists, and cultural commentators all weighed in on the lessons that could be drawn from this tragic series of events. Dr. Amelia Chen, a professor of political science at Harvard University, published a widely read paper titled "The Hartley Effect: Personal Morality in the Political Sphere." In it, she argued that the scandal had fundamentally altered the way Americans viewed their political leaders. Pre-Hartley, there was still a tendency to separate a politician's personal life from their public persona, Dr. Chen wrote. Post-Hartley, that line has been irrevocably blurred. Voters now demand a level of personal integrity from their leaders that goes beyond just professional competence. This shift in public perception led to changes in how political campaigns were run. Candidates became more open about their personal lives, often voluntarily disclosing information that would have been considered private in previous eras. Family became an even more central part of a politician's brand, with spouses and children taking on more visible roles in campaigns. The media landscape also evolved in the wake of the scandal. While tabloid-style reporting had always existed, the Hartley affair led to a more widespread acceptance of reporting on politicians' personal lives. This shift was not without controversy, with many arguing that it detracted from coverage of actual policy issues. Jake Thompson, a media critic for The Atlantic, noted this change in a column. Post-Hartley, the line between political reporting and celebrity gossip has become increasingly blurred, he wrote. While this has led to more transparency in some ways, it's also created a political culture that often prioritizes scandal over substance. In the realm of ethics and morality, the Hartley affair sparked numerous debates about fidelity, honesty, and the nature of public trust. Religious leaders and ethicists used the scandal as a launching point for discussions about the importance of personal integrity and the consequences of moral failings. Rabbi David Goldstein, in a widely shared sermon, spoke about the ripple effects of personal actions. The Hartley tragedy reminds us that our choices don't just affect us, he said. They touch the lives of our loved ones, our colleagues, and in the case of public figures, an entire nation. It's a stark reminder of our responsibility to live with integrity. The mental health aspects of the scandal also received significant attention. The tragic end of Michael Reeves sparked conversations about the psychological toll of public shame and the importance of mental health support, particularly for those in high-stress professions. Dr. Lydia Patel, a psychologist specializing in high-profile cases, began offering seminars for political staffers on maintaining mental health in the pressure cooker of Washington. The Reeves case showed us the potentially deadly consequences of neglecting mental health, she said in an interview. We need to create a culture where seeking help is seen as a strength, not a weakness. In the legal realm, the Hartley affair led to discussions about privacy laws and the extent to which public figures could expect protection from media scrutiny. While no major legislation was passed, several states did strengthen their privacy laws in the years following the scandal. Perhaps most significantly, the tragedy led to a re-evaluation of the human cost of political ambition. Many pointed to James Hartley's meteoric rise as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing career success over personal relationships and ethical behavior. This shift was reflected in a changing attitude among young people considering political careers. A survey conducted 5 years after the scandal found that many college students interested in politics cited maintaining personal integrity as a top concern, often ranking it above traditional goals like passing legislation or winning elections. Lisa Kwan, a 20-year-old political science major at Georgetown, summed up this sentiment in an interview with The Washington Post. The Hartley scandal showed us that no amount of political success is worth destroying your personal life over, she said. I want to make a difference in the world, but not at the cost of my principles or my relationships. As the 10th anniversary of the scandal approached, several retrospectives were published, each attempting to place the Hartley affair in its proper historical context. While opinions varied on the long-term significance of the events, there was a general consensus that it had marked a turning point in American political culture. Jonathan Alter, in a piece for The New Yorker, perhaps summed it up best. The Hartley affair was more than just a scandal. It was a national tragedy that forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, morality, and human nature. A decade on, its echoes can still be heard in the halls of power and in the national conversation about what we expect from our leaders and from ourselves. In the end, the legacy of the Hartley affair was complex and multifaceted. It was a story of personal failings and public consequences, of ambition and destruction, of the high cost of secrets and lies. But it was also a story that prompted reflection and, in some cases, positive change. As America moved forward, the lessons of the Hartley affair remained a part of the national consciousness, a somber reminder of the fragility of reputation, the importance of integrity, and the far-reaching consequences of our personal choices.